All right, guys, ready for some probability?
Nope.
There you are. It's actually fun. Yeah. Got it. Thank you, though. Yeah. All right, guys. So probability. Everybody with me? Everybody? All right. How's up? Okay, so probability, guys. I'm on page 93 or 91 or something like that. All right, so probability, a couple definitions that I need to throw out there. It's not going to have a vocab portion, but these words will show up. I don't generally have anybody who has issues with these words. You become used to them as we do the problems. But just to kind of get you started, an experiment, which I don't use that word a ton, but basically in the context of probability, an experiment is anything that's happening that I'm uncertain about, or anything I'm doing. Like if I roll a die, I'm uncertain about its outcome. If I flip a coin, if I draw marbles out of a bag, if I pull cards out of a deck, these are all uncertain things, right? I don't know what's going to happen. So if you have an experiment, it's anything that's uncertain. The outcomes of that experiment, or the things that happen, the possible things that could happen, are called outcomes. If I make a set of those outcomes, like if I say, hey, what's the set of the outcomes of flipping a coin? Well, you can get a head or tail. That head and tail, if I put them in a little set, would be what we call sample space. That's what could happen with those outcomes. If I talk about rolling a die, you could get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, right? That set of those outcomes would be the sample space. An event is a subset of that. So an event would be something like, hey, we're going to roll a die. How many ways can you get, or what's the probability of getting a 3? So not necessarily the answer, but the idea is what I'm specifically asking you about that experiment that we're trying to calculate, that particular thing I'm trying to find out with each of these problems, that would be the probability, that would be the event of which I'm trying to calculate the probability. So for instance, if I had a deck of cards sitting there and I'm going to draw 5 cards, and that would be the experiment, drawing 5 cards, right? The outcomes would be all the different ways I could draw 5 cards, right? The sample space would be listing all those options, which by the way are hundreds of thousands, so I'm not going to ask you to do that. But the event would be something like, hey, if you draw 5 cards, what's the probability of getting a full house? Or the probability of getting a straight? Or the probability of getting 2 pairs? Or the probability of getting full house, or whatever, 4 of a kind? Those are the things that I might ask you about. This is the stuff we're going to be calculating the probability about. It's little events of some random experiment. And you will see that over and over and over again. So I'm not going to go on the test, define event. What's the difference between an event and a sample space, or a sample space and an outcome? I'm not going to ask you that stuff, but these words will show up from time to time. Don't let them be a hindrance to understanding the problem. Okay, so like I gave you an example here of somebody blindly choosing 4 different numbers from the numbers 1 through 20. Well, that's going to be my experiment. That's what I'm doing, and the results are uncertain. Okay, the outcomes would be all the different ways I could get that. Now, I know that because I calculated it, but there's a lot of different ways to pick 4 numbers out of that, right? If I listed all those outcomes, right, in a set, like, and it could be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12, 14, 16, 18, whatever. If I listed all of them, those would be the sample spaces, all the different 4 number groupings. But the event would be, what's the probability of winning, which means picking 4 even numbers. So that particular event has a probability too, but the event would be, I guess, there are a lot of different examples, but it's what it's going to win, choosing those even numbers. And if I asked you what was the probability of that happening, you'd have to understand a little bit of all of what we've talked about, because probability is defined, I'm skipping this for a second, like this. So probability is defined as calculate the number of ways that would occur, the number of ways that would be in the event in question. Now remember, the event is getting 4 even numbers, right? So I'd have to calculate how many ways to get 4 even numbers. You actually know how to do that now. How many even numbers are there from 1 to 20? 10. How many are you choosing? Does the order in which you choose them has an effect on the outcome? So what is the number of ways? 10C4. That's your numerator. Okay? The denominator is the number of ways that you could have success or failure, which is the number in the sample space. Right? What's the sample space? Anything that could possibly happen by picking 4 numbers, right? Well, if you just need to pick 4 numbers, how many numbers are you choosing from? 20. How many are you choosing? 4. And does the order have an effect on the outcome? 20C4 in the denominator. So that's an example how we can use counting. Now I'm going to show you another way that's going to be needed at times, but that's an example of how I could have done that by just counting the number of the event, the number in the sample space, and I'm just using my fundamental counting principles. Y'all with me? Now, the reason why I'm able to do that here, and it may seem subtle, it's because this is what we call a dependent event. Now, I'm going to spend more time on dependent events probably tomorrow. But a dependent event, what does it sound like an event if it's dependent? Now, our event, we're picking 4 different numbers, right? To me, dependent sounds like that one choice is going to be affected by another because it depends on an outcome. And think about that. If I pick my first even number, you said there were 10 options, right? Once I pick that even number on my second choice, how many options are left? 9. Sounded like the number of ways to get that second choice were dependent on what happened first, right? Because it altered it. I picked one of those. All right, what about my third choice? Now there's only 8. My fourth choice, now there's only 7, whatever. So a dependent event has that nature that when you start with 10, every time you pick one, it drops by 1. What does that feel like? 10, 9, 8 times 7. Sounds like, feels like a what? Rhymes with tractorial. Factorial, right? It's a factorial. And what is the very nature of combinations and permutations? Factorials. So what that means is, if I had a situation that said, hey, same problem, but every time you pick a choice, put it back. Now, how many ways can you get an even number on the first choice? 10, put it back. How many ways can you get an even number on the second choice? Still 10. Third choice, still 10. Fourth choice, still 10. Does that sound like a factorial? And if that doesn't sound like a factorial, guess what? I cannot use combinations and permutations, and I would have to have another way to do it. And we'll talk about that as well too. So if you ever look at a problem and you're like, every time I do something, that thing is out of the picture, picking a card out of a deck, right? You don't play poker this way. I deal you a card, you get an ace, give it back. All right, and I deal you another card, and you just remember your hand. Oh no, believe me, man, I had 5 aces. Right? I mean, that's not the way it works, right? As soon as I deal a card, there's less of that card in the deck. There's less total cards in the deck. It's affected. The second choice is affected by the first one, right? And if it is, it's dependent on it. Dependent events, all day long, I can use combinations and permutations. Independent events, no. We'll talk a lot more about that as we go. Okay? So right now, I might blow the roof off your mental, what you feel is your mental ability right now, but give it time. Time and consistency, practice will make much better. All right. So you might feel like your head's spinning a little bit. The further we go into this, we're spending a number of days, right? When's our test? What's it scheduled for? Next Friday? Next Thursday? Today's Thursday. We have a full week just to talk about probability. All right. And we've already talked about how to count, which is the very nature of probability. So at this point, all we're really doing is talking about a dependent, independent, mutually exclusive. Throw up a couple different topics like that in order. Doesn't matter the order. A lot of different things like that, different kinds of stuff. But at the end of the day, you're gonna be very comfortable with this if you care enough to do all the stuff. All right, so let's just look at a couple random situations. This problem we just talked about, right? Right up in this problem. I want to find the probability that if I pick 4 numbers, I get 4 even ones, right? 4 numbers out of these 20, I get even. And we just did talk about that, didn't we? So we'd say 10C4 in the numerator, 20C4 in the denominator. And then if that wasn't my test, you'd probably want to simplify that and clean it up. But we would just leave it like that, 10C4 over 20C4, call it a day. All right. Hey, here's something actually that's missed a lot. Probability, as you can see up here in my definition, is defined between 0 and 1. I realize sometimes people talk like this. Hey, what's the probability that rains tomorrow? 30%. What does 30% mean? Because probability is defined between 0 and 1. What does percent mean? Divide by 100. So 30% means 30 divided by 100, which is 0.3. So people kind of misuse the word percent, in my opinion. I've never seen somebody, maybe one of these new Algebra 2 textbooks, no old books define percent between 0 and 100, or probability between 0 and 100. It's always 0 to 1. So if you wrote 30% on something, it's fine. We're not simplifying, so it's not going to happen on our work. But keep in mind that it's normally between 0 and 1. So if I were to ask you a question like this, and by the way, does anybody in here not know how a deck of cards is organized? It's totally okay. Deck of cards? Give me a weird look. Anybody not know? I don't trust you. Okay. Somebody doesn't know, and they're just showing. Okay, so let's look at a deck of cards. This is what a deck of cards would look like. All right, so every day, and we're going to be doing a lot with card hands and things like that. You don't have to know how to play poker to be able to do this. Just pay attention in class, you'll be fine on the text. All right, so a deck of cards is organized. It has 4 different suits. All right, the suits are hearts, diamonds, clubs, and spades. Okay, those are the 4 kinds of suits that are in a deck. In each one of those suits, there are 13 cards. Those 13 cards that show up will be the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way through 10. 10, and then Jack, Queen, King, and Ace. The Ace is a unique card, and again, this is not something that would matter in the context of our test. But the Ace is normally played high when it's like pairs or whatever, but it's also an optional card to play low. So in one of the hands in cards often is a straight. So you could have an Ace, 2, 3, 4, 5 straight. You could also have a 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace straight. If you play it low, though, the 5 would be the high card. You play it high, the Ace would be the high card. If you have pairs, Ace, you play it as a high pair. You wouldn't say, I got a pair of 1s. I mean, you would rather have a pair of like 13s, I guess is what it's called, if you counted them all the way down. So that's the highest ranking card, but can also be played low. Doesn't really matter. The point is, this shows up under that. This shows up under that. This shows up. This shows up under this as well, and also under this. So you have 13 different cards that are hearts, diamonds, clubs, and spades. So if I asked you this question, what's the probability if I draw 5 cards that I get 5 kings? What would you say? Thank you. Most people say it's impossible. Okay, what is probability defined between? 0 and 1, not impossible and 1, right? So if it's defined between 0 and 1, if it is impossible, in fact, to get something, then the probability that it happens is 0, right? So don't say impossible when it is impossible. All right, what is the probability if I pick 5 cards that all 5 are different, period? Don't add anything to it. 1. Why? Because there are no cards the same. They might be the same suit, but then they're different kinds. They might be the same kind, but they're different suits. But there are no cards that are identical, at least not in a standard deck of cards that we have questions about. All right. So that would probability be what? What's the probability that they're all 5 different? 1. So impossible, 0. 100% chance, 1, or certain, 1. But don't use the word impossible when you're doing situations that don't work. Just write probability 0. All right. Where am I? So that brings me to here. So I'm going to kind of start off on a question, and I want to talk about 2 different ways you could do this. The way I have it written right here is not the way that you currently know, but I want to introduce you to an alternate method that will be great when you suddenly have independent events and not dependent like this is. So this problem is a lot of blah, 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 but it says at the end of the day, I'm choosing 2 different balls from a bag of balls of varying colors. So here's the deal. I've got a bag. It has 5 reds, 9 greens, and 6 whites. I'm sorry. I'm choosing 3 marbles randomly, right? So pretend I'm just reaching in there and not looking at any of the marbles. Question is, find the probability that 2 are red and 1 are green. Now, forget what I have here. This is a correct way of doing it, but forget it. Based on your counting principles, if I'm trying to figure out the probability of getting 2 red and a green, isn't that the same thing as counting the number of ways I can get 2 red and a green, and then counting the number of ways I can just get 3 marbles in general, right? Number in the event over number in the sample space. What would you do to do the number in this event? How many ways can I get 2 red marbles from this? How many ways? Well, there's 5 more red marbles to choose from. I'm picking what? 2 of them. Does the order in which I choose them have an effect on the outcome? No. So that sounds a lot like 5C2. Now, how many ways can I pick the 1 green marble? 9C1, right? Because the order doesn't have an effect on the outcome. So what I just wrote here, and I'm multiplying, is the number of ways I can get 2 reds and 1 green. We were doing that last couple days, right? Now, the bottom, the denominator, is the number of ways any outcome could happen when I pick 3, because the experiment was picking 3 balls out of the, or marbles out of the bag, right? The event was specifically 2 red and 1 green. So how many ways can I pick 3 out of the bag? 20 to choose from. You're picking 3. Order doesn't affect the outcome. Now, that right there, believe it or not, is the same as this. And I'll show you exactly why in a second. But before, I want to show you that there's another way to do this. And here's the advantage of this. Again, what if I change this problem right here to say, find the probability of that I get 2 balls and 1 green if I replace the marble after each choice. After each choice, whatever. If I replace it, then the factorial is not in play, is it? If I replace it, I'm not getting 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 over 3, 2, 1. I'm just getting 5 times 5 times 5. Are you with me? Then I can't use combinations. So if I said that, I can't do this. Combinations don't work when I have replacement. And by the way, replacement doesn't always sound like replacement. Flipping a coin. I got a head. Do I replace the head? No, but can't I still get a head when I flip it the next time? That's an independent event. And you don't have to put it back to be independent. It has to always still be an option to be independent. If I pull out the ace of spades, it's no longer an option, right? That's a dependent event. Dependent events, all day long, combinations and permutations. Independent events, can't do it because there's no factorial nature of the problem anymore. And in that case, you're going to shift gears and do it like this. But you can do it like this on dependence also. Some people go, well, why don't you just do it like that on both, on all the time? This is why. I have 47,000 people in my city. I want to pick 3,000 of them. What's the probability that of those 3,000, 1,800 have black hair, 100 has red hair, and 1,100 are blondes? Do you really want, and you'll see, do you really want to write that many fractions each time you calculate an individual probability? No chance. You'd be here all day. That would sure be nice to go like 1,200 C300 or whatever. Right? So this is a really efficient way of doing it. This is kind of a drawn out way, but I have to go this route on a dependent situation. Now let me show you what I'm doing right here. Okay, the way I'm thinking here is I am going to literally calculate the individual probabilities of each choice. So I am getting red, red, green. So I'm going to calculate the probability of getting your first choice being red, the probability the second choice is red, the probability that the third choice is green. So let's just do that. On your first choice, what's the probability that I get a red marble? Forget about everything you've learned. This is what I have. What's the probability that on your first choice it's red? 5 out of a total of 20, right? Don't bother reducing it to 1/4. Just leave it as 5 out of 20. It'll be easier for you, right? So 5 out of 20. There's my probability right there. 5 out of 20. Now, once I take that marble out, what happens? There's one less red, and there's also one less total. So now my second red choice, what's the probability? 4 to 19. I'm going to multiply by 4 over 19. Now, once I take that red out, there's one less red and one less total. But now I want to know what's the probability that I get that green marble. So now there's still 9 green, but out of a total of what? And that's my last. Now I have a question. What's this then? Well, here's what that thing out front is. The thing out front is realizing that what you calculated was not the probability of getting a red, and a green. What you calculated was the probability of getting a red first and a red second and a green last. But aren't there other ways to get red, green? And do you know if you calculated the probability of getting red, green, red, it's exactly, now the numbers will be in a different order, but they'll be the same 6 numbers there. And if you find the probability of getting a green, red, the order of the numbers is a little different, but it's the same thing. So really, what you want to do is just say, okay, I'm going to calculate the probability of going red, green, but then I'm going to count all the different ways that thing could be arranged. And how do you calculate how many different arrangements of RRG are there? It's kind of like Mississippi, right? 3 factorial, but there's 2 of one kind, so over 2 factorial. You can put 1 factorial too. That's what this is. Because think about it. Couldn't I go red, green? I could go red, green, red. I could go green, red. So there's 3 different ways. Well, that's what 3 factorial, but 2 factorial, 1 factorial count is. Are y'all seeing that? This right here is that right there. It just doesn't look like it. So I'm going to show you. All right. Now I'm going to actually do the math on this, and then I'm going to really align it, and you're going to see that it's exactly the same thing. So here we go. What's 5C2 mean? 5 factorial over the difference factorial, comma 2 factorial, right? What does 9C1 mean? 9 factorial, the difference factorial, 1 factorial. And on the bottom, 20 factorial over the difference factorial, 3 factorial. You with me so far? Right now, it doesn't look much alike. What happens if I divide by this fraction on the bottom? Isn't that the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal? Y'all with me? Okay, now check this out. I'm going to get rid of that. Okay, now watch this. Isn't 5, let me make sure I have this. I'm going to do this right. Okay. Isn't 5 factorial over 3 factorial just leave me 5 times 4? And doesn't 9 factorial over 8 factorial just leave me a 9? And doesn't 17 factorial over 20 factorial leave me a 20, a 19, and an 18 on the bottom? Y'all with me? All right, check it out. 5 times 4 times 9 in the numerator. 20 times 19 times 18 in the denominator. 3 factorial in the numerator over 2 factorial, 1 factorial. You with me? 2 different ways you can do this problem. Now, I'm going to talk about this a bunch more, a ton more, but challenge for the gold star. In this problem, I'm going to go back and erase this. What if, all right, so this is, I've calculated 2 different ways to do this. In this problem, right here, I'm pointing at the blue stuff that I've circled. Well, I'll get rid of the blue. Okay, in this problem right here that I've written out this way, what would you do if I change this problem to be that I'm going to get 2 red balls and 1 green ball, and I said in that order? What do I get rid of? All right, now for the gold star. How do I change this? thought you were going to say it. Change it to P. Because what does a permutation differ from a combination? Right? But mathematically, what does it differ from? The combination does what? It divides by an extra 2 factorial, 1 factorial, 3 factorial, right? So if I'm dividing that number by a 2 factorial, that's an extra 2 factorial in the denominator, an extra 1 factorial in the denominator, and an extra 3 factorial in the denominator of the denominator, which makes it the numerator of the final part. So if it says in that order and I get rid of this, if I want to do it this way, great. If I wanted to still do it this way, just change it to P's, and then it doesn't divide by that extra 2, 1, 3. So this would be the same as that. Are you seeing this? Yes, no? We're going to go over this a ton. So again, as long as I'm making a slight dent, I'm happy. We'll keep bludgeoning you with this for the next 4 days before your test. Okay, let's check out another one. Example 2, it says 3 are selected. I don't know why I said 1 red and 1 right and didn't account for the third number. Everybody scribble that out. I don't want to mess with it right now. Scribble that out. Because if I said 1 red and 1 right, but the condition was you picked 3, you would still need to account for that other third marble, wouldn't you? Right? If I said you're picking 3 and I want to make sure I have 1 red and 1 white, well, then what's the third one? All right, so I don't know why I didn't account for that. How about this one? I'm changing things up. We're just going to do this anyway. This would be, what if I pick 7? I'm picking 7 marbles. So let me just change this one. Number 3, we're picking 7 marbles. I want to get 2 red, 2 white, and 3 green in that order. Now, if I say in that order, I can still pick them with combinations, permutations, but just not combinations. So I can still pick them with permutations. So how many ways can I get 2 red marbles? Well, how many red marbles were there? 5. So I'm going to go 5, P2. Okay, and then I'll come back and do this other way. How many ways can I get 2 white marbles? How many white marbles are there? 6. So I'm going to say 6, P2, specifying the order. How many ways can I get 3 greens? Was it 9? 9, P3. And how many ways can I pick these 7 marbles from all the marbles? That's the number in the sample space. 20, P7, right? Now, thinking this way, this is saying in that order. So I want red, red, white, white, green, green, green in that order. What's the probability on your first choice that it's red? Well, there's 5 reds, there's 20 marbles, 5 out of 20. Next one's red, 4 out of 19. Now, then I shift to white. What's the probability that I get a white one? 6 out of 18. Next white, 5 out of 17. What's the probability that I get a green one? 9 out of the remaining 16, then 8 out of 15, then 7 out of 14. And I don't do the junk in front because the junk in front does what? It accounts all the different ways the order could change, but I don't want those. I want this order. Now look back up here at these P's. What did I say 5P2 really meant? Shortcut way of thinking. The first 2 numbers in 5 factorial, right? Because that really means what? 5 factorial over 3 factorial, which simplifies to 5 times 4. First 2 numbers in 5 factorial. Bam, bam. What's 6C2 mean? First 2 numbers in 6 factorial. Bam, bam. What's 9P3 mean? First 3 numbers in 9 factorial. Bam, bam, bam. What does 20P7 mean? First 7. Bam, 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 bam. So these mean the same thing on your test. Just pick one and do it. And again, if I had this and I did not say in this order, then what do? How many ways can I arrange those 7 letters? Think Mississippi. 7 factorial over 2 factorial, 2 factorial, 3 factorial. And how do I make this account for no, the order doesn't matter? C, 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 C. You can get that done, you're going to be in great shape. That's one of the hardest concepts to kind of navigate. And then I could really make it nasty by, not really nasty actually. What if I gave you the same problem and said, you're picking these marbles in this order with replacement. So you're putting it back every time. Can I even do a combinations or permutations? No, those are independent events. Doesn't matter what happens, I put it back, the probabilities are not changing. But let me ask you this. So I have to do it this way. First choice, 5 out of 20. Put the marble back. What's the second choice? Still 5 out of 20. What's the third choice? 6 out of 20. What's the fourth choice? 6 out of 20. What's the fifth choice? 9 out of 20. 9 out of 20. 9 out of 20. Which I would just write 5 out of 20 squared, 6 out of 20 squared, 9 out of 20 cubed. But I would not be able to use permutation combination because it's an independent event. Replacement, flipping a coin, rolling a die, probability doesn't change. Do you know in Vegas, they have this at a lot of casinos. I'm not recommending you go to Vegas. I've been a couple of times in my life and I have had enough. But I even took my kids once and they were like 15, 17, 13. Got a great snapshot. It's probably over there. It's over there. We're all jumping like goofy in front of the sign. Anyway, point is, we went and ate at a big buffet and I walked them through a casino and I just wanted to get a glimpse of it. It was kind of like, and they were like, I'm kind of unimpressed. Anyway. But, and there's a reason I was telling this. Oh, yes. Vegas is always wired to take your money. I mean, if you stay there long enough, you're going to lose. It's math. Accept it. When somebody goes to Vegas and they go, oh man, I made a killing. They might have. But if they keep going back, they're going to lose in the long. Those big, giant, beautiful places do not get paid from losses. Okay, you are going to lose. Every single game in that casino is wired against you. And the few games that might not be, that you're kind of going head to head, like if you're playing in a Texas Hold'em tournament, the house is still getting theirs. Like if you buy a $500 buy-in to get $500 in chips, you're paying $550 for the buy-in. And they give you $500 in chips. Okay, so they're always going to get 10% of your money or whatever, or however it's wired. But if you want to play the longest with a set amount of money, you're like, hey, I want to play as long as I can. Your best bet's probably roulette. Because on a roulette wheel, you might have 50 numbers, right? Half a red, half a green, sort of. They throw a couple, half a red, half a black, but they throw a couple greens in there. So you've got a 25 and 52 chance of hitting. Well, that's almost half. That's about as good as it's ever going to be in Vegas. So if you want to play a long time, play this. But guess what they have at these roulette tables? I've seen it before in person. Not everyone, but I've seen it. They'll have a column. It's like, I don't know, 6, 7 feet high. And it'll have all the last winning numbers. So it'll be like red 35, black 16. Why do they have it there? Do what?
Inspire people to bet on smaller things so that they'll lose more.
Well, it's just the results. They're showing the winning numbers and whatever. Why do you think they put them up there? No, there's a psychological imbalance with people that don't understand math. Maybe not an imbalance, but there's something psychological about looking up there and going, 13 red hit. I'm not betting 13 red again. That's never good. There's no way it's going to hit twice in a row. That's like flipping a coin and getting ahead and going, man, I'm so tails on the next flip. If anything, it's inclined to be heads, right? If you flip a coin and it lands 6, I think there's an even chance of going heads and tails. But if I was superstitious about something, I might think, oh, maybe it's a weighted coin. It's leaning a little towards the head. But by putting those numbers up there, they're playing on your mind. It's really laughable. Like I really want to go, anybody who's looking at these numbers to try to make a prediction doesn't understand probability and independent events. Because when you spin a roulette wheel, it is a completely independent situation. I guess you could, if you really did a study and you figured out hand strength and arm strength, like how many rotations are we getting and what is if you really measured how many times it spins and got some kind of calculation, maybe. But I'm pretty sure that those guys are told to spin it at different rates and just do different things just to make it completely arbitrary. So the tower is a tower of lies. Okay. But it really sucks people in because sometimes you'll go, man, it's hit 6 times red. It's so due black. Oh, and people push out a big giant number thinking that's going to make a difference. When if anything, they ought to be inclined to think, man, it keeps hitting red. Maybe there's something wrong with this wheel. But there's not. They regulate the crud out of that in Las Vegas. Point is, they play on your head. You're going to lose in Vegas if you play there long enough. But I used to see people playing. The thing that really turned me off against Vegas, I was probably 25. I think it was my first year teaching. My parents lived in Arizona. I had a friend who was in grad school, and we were like, no, let's take a big road trip. I said, I'm going to be out in Phoenix. Why don't you fly out there right after Christmas? You'll meet me. We'll get a car. And we took this road trip up through the Grand Canyon, into Vegas, into LA. We slept on the side of the road of the Rose Bowl parade. I mean, we just had this big, fun road trip. Slept in snow at the top of the Grand Canyon, which froze our tails off. Anyway, we did this big road trip. But I remember in Vegas, my friend was like, man, I'm exhausted. I was like, go to bed. I'm kind of curious what's going on here. So this was old Vegas in the 90s. Like, it's called Old Vegas now. The new Vegas Strip, and then there's the Old Vegas Strip. So I was walking around, which you don't go out in Vegas at 2 a.m. if you ever do go. It is awful. It's just from family atmosphere to awful at about 10:30 or 11. But I was cruising around like an idiot by myself at 2 a.m. And I remember walking into this gas station, and it was a converted gas station into just a slot. It was for like really low rent, sketchy smoke that was to the ceiling all the way down to the floor. It's like you had to swim through it to get somewhere. But I remember this image that really impacted me. Even this was 30-something years ago. There was this woman, 28 years ago, 29. There was this woman sitting on a stool at 2 a.m. playing slots. And that's not that unusual. I mean, you get in these rooms and they're all blacked out. You don't even know what time it is. It was a penny slot machine. She had curlers in her hair. She has this cup of pennies. She's sucking on a cigarette that her whole face like went, it just like swallowed in this thing. And she's sitting there with her curlers covered in smoke, 2 a.m, putting pennies into a slot machine for a grand prize, which is not going to happen, of $20. What does that reek of to you? Even worse. Just a massive addiction. And it sucks people in. Now I'm getting my soapbox a little bit, but if you ever, listen, I play poker with my buddies. It's a good time. On my worst night, I'm down 30. On my best night, I'm up 100. My friends don't really understand the game of poker super well. They just understand camaraderie. I completely prey on that. I'm ultra competitive. I know their tells. I got this one guy who's in sales, does really well for himself. And he's just chatty and he talks and just having fun. And the second he gets a good hand, he becomes very interested in the game. So he'll be like just hanging out. He'll get a good hand. Hey man, what are you betting? What are you betting? And he'll like force the hand around the table. Well, the second I see that, I'm like, Jeff's got a good hand. So if I know that I don't have the better hand, I'm out. And he's like, man, I never take your money. I'm like, you don't even know your own tells. Like, it's so obvious. Like, and certain guys have those things, and you accumulate this thing, and it's fun to play with them. And the only way I lose is if I'm one of those moods like, I'm in, and I just quit thinking and just start having fun. Then maybe I lose. Or if I just don't get a hand. I mean, you don't get a hand, you might be able to bluff your way out in a couple, but at some point they're like, he's been bluffing all night, and they call you on. So, but most of the time I take their money. If you're ever in Vegas or you're ever in gambling and you haven't figured out who the sucker is at the table in about 5 minutes, it's you. All right. And that's probably the only way you can win is if you're playing like a hold'em game against not the house, but against other human souls, and you've got maybe more ability. But if you're playing a game like roulette, 21 blackjack, whatever, those games are wired against you. Have fun. When I play poker with my friends, I'm like, dude, I could go play golf. That's $120 or $80 or whatever. I could go to a dinner and a movie, whatever, or go out to the movies. That's $50, $60. I can play poker, and on my worst night, I'm down 30, and I'm hanging out for 5-6 hours. Sounds fun. It's cheap entertainment to me. And most of the time, I don't lose. Most of the time, I'm up and taking the money. But if you ever find yourself going, Like I had a friend like this. He goes, man, I got a system. Okay, I bet on the early game in football. It's like 10:30 game. I bet on that. If I lose, I put $10. If I lose, and I put 20 on my next bet to cover. If I lose that, I put 30 on my next game to cover the next two. If I lose that, I put 60. He goes, and what are the chances of losing 4 or 5 in a row? So as soon as I make back my money, I'm even and I go back to bet 10. He goes, can't lose. I'm like, so you're saying that you couldn't lose 10 games in a row? He goes, well, it's possible. I'm like, it's very possible. I mean, it's not like super possible, right? 2 to the 10th is 1024. But if you play that a number of times, if you do this like on a Saturday night and a Sunday night, and you do that almost every weekend of the year, that's 100 times. I mean, if it's 1 out of 1,000 that it could happen and you're doing it 100 times, it's starting to get likely that that might happen, right? I kid you not. Lost 10, bet 20, now he's down 30. Bet 30, now he's down 60. Bet 120 to cover this, whatever, now he's down 120. Bet to cover the 120, now he's down 240. Bet again, this time it's starting to get late afternoon. Bet a 240 to cover it, now he's down 480. Or I'm a little off on my numbers, whatever, I'm off on my numbers. Bet 480 to cover the 480. Now he's down 960. The late Pacific Coast Washington versus Oregon game. It starts at like 10:30. He's sweating bullets. Bets 960, whatever, to cover it. Falls asleep, wakes up, loses that again. He's down $1,800 in 1990, which is like $4,000 now. And now he's got to pay up. He doesn't have the money. And he's got a thumb-breaking bookie knocking at his door, and he's calling his dad and going, hey, Dad, guess how stupid I am? If that's you, you have a problem. Call a friend, get some help. There's Gamblers Anonymous, whatever. Run away and don't make another bet. I did one weekend, I bet $10. I did. I bet $10 and lost. And then I was like, oh, I got to cover. So I bet the next weekend, I bet 20 and I won. And I'm like, this is mathematically unsound. And the crazy thing is the way to you can lose a ton in a day, but your best bet, if you just bet 10 and win, and then bet another 10 and win, your upside is what on a 9-game day? $90. Your downside is negative 2,000. It's horrible odds. You just don't want that. If you get into a situation where you're gambling and you're really doing it because you need the money, or you start doing a little too much, just run, get some help, call me. I will talk you off the ledge. Don't call me and say I need a loan. No, but seriously, if you're doing it for fun, like I have a friend who makes great money. He's got sideline tickets at the Auburn games. I was right at courtside, whatever. And every time he drives into Georgia, he buys a lottery ticket. I'm like, why do you buy those things? He goes, it's fun. $10, $20, whatever. He just does it out of habit every time. It's just fun for him. And sometimes he hits like a $200 hit and he's like, sweet. I just made up for 1/1000th of what I've spent over my lifetime. But it's fun for him. And if he ever does hit it, I mean, he'll probably give me a call and go, but he's not going to hit it. It's 1 in zillions. But the point is, if you're doing something like that for fun, great. If you ever find well, maybe not great. Maybe it's against what you believe. But if you ever are doing it, you're like, man, I got to pay the power bill. I got this. You have a problem. Is what you got. And get some help. I had a roommate who got addicted to playing 2-man spades. And he was like playing for quarters. And he liked it so much, he started disappearing for a day or two. And we're like, what happened to this guy? Found out he was going to Mississippi, down to Biloxi, and getting on boats and whatever, and gambling during the day while he should have been classes. And I kid you not, some big oafy thumbbreaker came knocking on our door looking for Joel, because Joel owed him $3,000 or something like that from bad bets on something. Addiction. You do not want that. Now, he was like a summer roommate that was subleasing. It was like a buddy of mine, but I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a thumbbreaker knocking at my door. I mean, what if he thought I was Joel? You know? So if you ever find that happening, run, get some help. You're playing with your buddies for entertainment and you can afford it. Whatever. All right, we'll pick up where we were tomorrow.
I feel like have research before you do that. Money now. I do like 20 minutes of research on hand. Just so I don't lose like 30 bucks. You're a bad person. 200. The water bill. I want 200. Oh no, I got it. Man, I know the whole league. But you don't know who's bad. That's right. Yeah. John, those poor things.
I got no money. I'm broke.
Even a little extra cat.
Until I vote.
Sorry, belly, $5.
I got like 30.
That five. They grow muscles, penny wagers. Maybe that's like 25 cents on
Yeah.
I think it's like $1.
Yeah. I got money for it. Even like 40 bucks.
That's one of the might be those. You got like Martinez, he got like 25 cents, he got like $1.73 off of. Team winning.
I have about like 17 cents, like $40 payout.
But that makes 0 sense. Like that's like a scam. There's no way.
It's not even like no chance of that. Like, it's a good payout.
That's like, I mean, that's a great payout, but there's no way it's gonna happen.
Yeah, look at it. See you guys.
Okay, you're sorry?
I'm good, man.
It's not cake, it's like refrigerated,
I'm good.
no bake.
Thank you for offering that.
So guys.
What's up, man? Long time no see.
Yeah. But then AP Psych always do this. Those are like a quarter. Good teacher. Yeah.
I mean, we do that for dinner today. This is hard to believe. They're like, about them yourself. Today we made it. I don't know.
This is all. In case I guess I'll use it for.
Juice boxes, like, like a dozen. I like juice. Let's start in. No, we just got it in an abundant amount.
You're like a leader. That one was like trying to trigger him in our Spanish class last year. Especially years when I had like mall and grandma. This is like really good.
Yeah, I tried to. It's
All right.
That's what we tried to get away today.
How are you guys? All right. You got that no pharmacy?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
She was like, I was trying to figure out, like, dude, she was like, answered, yeah, an assignment sheets for this.
Yeah, but no. I get you.
Kind of vague.
All right. I forget where I am between the two classes, so help me out. So we talked about 4 different plans here, right? The 4 different options that I was kind of looking at yesterday. I'm on page 127, 125, something like that in yours. But the four different options were it's basically a chart. If you weren't here, basically it was a chart in case you weren't here. The heck? I'm going the wrong one. Oh, I'm missing it. Okay, where different ways you could either retire. This would be considered a traditional IRA or a 403B, kind of a 401k. These are pre-tax options. Again, retirement plans for you guys. I hope that you all do very well. I hope that you have extra money to put towards your retirement, money to invest in addition to that, and that you don't all just put the same thing. I mean, put everything in the market, because you might have situations where, hey, I want to, buy a home, make that part of your investment strategy, because homes grow in value almost always. On my first home I bought for $130, sold it 6 years later for $238. My second home I bought for $358, and it's currently valued at like $625. So those are ways that you can increase your value as opposed to just paying somebody rent the whole time. Now, granted, I spend money in upkeep. I got a $2,000 air conditioning bill the other day where somebody had to come in and they're going to have to clean our ducts and seal them for some little black mold they found. I had to redo my septic in the backyard. Did it myself. It cost me close to $4 or $5 grand, and it would have cost me $20 grand. I had somebody else do it if I could even find somebody else. So homeowner, it's expensive at times, but you also have your own home. You have a place where you can play your music too loud, not worry about neighbors. You can whatever, and it does build value. And sometimes you can even rent some of your space to other people if you wanted to. I think one of the wisest things young guys can do is, if you have that ability, is as soon as you can, get a house while everybody's young and single. Not only is it fun because you can have all your friends that you have move in with you, but you can let them pay your mortgage for you. I mean, there was this house in Montgomery, they called it the Hillwood Home for Unwed Brothers. And it was all these guys between the ages of like 23 and 30 that would never gotten married or hadn't gotten married yet. They're all, I think, married now. Maybe one of them is not. One of them actually is not. He actually subs over here. I saw him the other day. But he's 70 or close to it. But anyway, these guys, one guy bought the house. It was a 5-bedroom house over in this area called Hillwood. And he rented 4 rooms out to his friends for like, I don't know, about today's value money would be like $600 a room. And he was making $2,400. His mortgage wasn't $2,400. So he was literally living for free, letting his friends pay his mortgage, what he owed to the bank. Sounds like a good plan. No rent, and I'm making money. So he was just basically a mini landlord. But I have friends, like, I don't know if you know who it's called Christopher Architects and Interiors. If you ever see a really nice, sweet house that's new in Homewood, like the really impressive ones that you see, and you're like, good night, what did that thing cost? There's a good chance it's either Louis Niquette and his company, and his kids go here. Jake graduated a couple years. I think he has a child still here. Or Christopher Architects, a guy named Chris Rebels, who's on our wall twice, once for wrestling and once for football. Was all-state in both of those. But he's a phenomenal architect too. But the first thing he did when he got into Birmingham is he started cobbling enough money to put a down payment on a place. And I don't even know if he lived in it. I think he bought it and just started renting it and used it as an income producer. And he set up the mortgage to be 15 years. So 15 years later, he's 37, and now he just has an income stream. And he's done that in dozens of places, houses. Now he does it with commercial buildings. The guy's worth a lot of money. But point is, you don't have to just invest. But what I'm talking about here is what the government allows you tax-free. So you either can avoid taxes, which is what I'm talking about here on the front end by investing before you pay your taxes. And that will grow and grow and grow and grow. And I did this rate at a 40 years out, it'll be worth 2.5 million at only 9.5%. Tomorrow we'll pull our calculators out and you'll start seeing how, and on Friday too, we'll pull our calculators out. If that percent just goes up 1 point, this number just explodes. Because you're talking about exponential growth rates over 40 years. One might finish here, 9.5, 10.5 might finish here, 11.5 might finish here. It's just amazing. Just a 1% difference, what it does. And we'll play around with our calculators and see that. But the only negative thing about this is because you avoided taxes on the front end, now all of that is taxable. But the upside is you're 62, The kids are out of college. I'm 54 and my kids are almost out of college. But I've already put their money away for college. So I'm done. Like I put money away to cover like their last 2 years. And then I scrounge and fight through on the first two to get them paid. So Caroline's already got her money for college. She'll hopefully be able to stretch it through her 3 for architecture. If not, she'll have to take a loan out. My other kids got out debt free. I really have really no more expenses after I pay off my first daughter's wedding. I mean, after I finish paying for my first daughter's wedding, which we're almost done with all of our deposits and stuff and paying all that off. We'll be done on a month from today when she gets married. But I'll have one wedding, one rehearsal dinner. And after that, my house is paid off, cars are paid off. Like we're really in great financial shape. Yeah, I'll take a little bit of hit if I retire completely and do nothing, but I won't do nothing. I'll always be doing something. And some of it will be fun. Some of it will be income producing.
You're talking about houses. Why do houses appreciate and cars depreciate?
Because cars eventually become unusable. But houses don't because they're built on land and things like. Now houses can depreciate.
Like I said, they both take debt. They both like wear after use.
They do, yeah. But most people keep houses up. I mean, like some things about houses, like the siding. I mean, if you have a brick house, brick's not going anywhere. It's going to be there in 100 years. I mean, you might get some cracks in it and have to do some smart money repairs. Your roof, you're going to have to replace, yes. And that's money. It's not cheap to buy a roof. You're probably going to do updates and renovations and replace carpet and stuff like that. But at least it is appreciating at a rate. Like I've had my house now for probably 16 years, and it gets doubled in value. And I haven't put $300,000 in it, but I've gotten that money out. I've gotten plenty of money. If I were to sell it, it's definitely an appreciable asset. Would it have appreciated more than if I just put my money in? I went and lived in a crappy apartment for $1,200 a month and took all that extra money and invested it. I'd probably be better off with the apartment, but I'd lived in a crappy apartment for 17 years, as opposed to living in a really nice house with a great yard for a dog and kids to play and a creek for them to find frogs in. And anytime I eat dinner and I look out my window, there's 5 deer eating right beside my fence. I mean, it's a little, and there's giant barn owls in the backyard, and it's like a little paradise. I mean, but if you want to live in an apartment, great. Like my son's like, Dad, I'm not gonna have a house like you. I don't want to cut the grass because I'm gonna live in an apartment like at the top of like at the Pizitz. I'm gonna buy a 3-bedroom. I'm gonna live up there. If I want my kids to play, I'll take them to Railroad Park. If I wanted to swim, we'll drive to Lifetime Fitness. That's his mentality. And honestly, that's a lot of young people's mentality. Why have a house you got to cut the grass and maintain? I want to travel. I want to do this. But knowing that, I mean, if you pay rent on things, you might be better off in the long run. But the housing, I mean, look at Homewood. I almost bought a house in Homewood in 1997. They were asking $120,000. It was a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. There's a street that kind of loops off of a Salter, kind of goes in, loops around, and comes back out. It's like right next to Sanford. And it was a little tiny house over there. And we were like, man, we have 2 kids and we're out of this house. So we ended up moving out down Shelby County and getting a 3-bedroom, 3-bath with a big yard for the same price. But that 3-bedroom, 3-bath bed with the big yard for the same price is worth $280,000. That house in Homewood, that lot in Homewood is probably worth $400,000. If you scrape the house and then build something else on it. So yeah, you pay money to get, it's an investment, but hopefully it's an investment you can actually enjoy. And living in an apartment is fine. Totally. A lot of people live in apartments. My son is going to choose that. Honestly, one day I'll be like, I'm done with the apartment. With the house. It's a lot of work. I mean, I got a half undone front yard. I got 3 built things of sod I got to lay at some point to finish off my landscape. I'm constantly working my tail off back there. I like that. It's all right. I don't mind it. But there's probably going to come a point where we're like, this house is too big for us. And a little apartment downtown, ride the elevator, get a little coffee, walk down to El Barrio, whatever. That actually sounds good. Go to a brewery, head to the baseball game, whatever reason. That actually sounds kind of cool. So get maybe a cheap flat somewhere downtown and maybe a place at the lake and swap it out, rent that when I can, hop back and forth. I mean, anyway, all those are investment strategies, but this was just to show you different ways you could end up with money. If you don't invest at all, and you take that money you would have invested in, you're still going to have to pay taxes on what you would have invested. So if you take that money and you divide it by 365, you're talking about $12 a day. You're not going to live that well. I mean, you can't go out with your buddies for $12, okay? But if you just make some small sacrifices, like don't eat out so much, don't get tea with your barbecue meal at Jim and Nick's. Save 12, turn your thermostat to 72 instead of 71. All these things can save you a ton of money. Turn the pilot light off on your gas fireplace. Saves you $25 a month. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to save this kind of money. And then you squirrel it away, be wise, and just stick it away. And you do it, and you're a millionaire 40 years later. And guys, this is just one person doing this. If you're married and you're both doing it, my wife and I both do it. If you're both doing it, double all these numbers. And then also keep in mind, I showed you the percentages on that Kager, right? The percentages on that Kager were like 11.8, 12.2, whatever. I ran it on 9.5. So 9.5 is really more along the lines of what your money would be. That's not what you'll have, but that's what it'll be worth. It'll be worth that much in the future. Because we all know in 40 years, $1 is not going to buy the same amount that now that it does then, right? You're already seeing that with inflation. I mean, car prices are up 35%. Food prices are up 7 to 10. I mean, a lot of things have been affected by that. But anyway, I just wanted to show you this. But keep in mind that third column is, I don't have to make it retirement fund. If you put it in the retirement fund, you're locked in until 59 and a half. And they charge a big penalty if you pull it out. So like I've known people who have had their 401, 403b, 401k, traditional IRA, they just got in a bind and they needed that money. Now keep in mind, you've never paid taxes on it. So if I pulled out 10,000, I have to pay taxes on everything that I didn't pay, which could be 25, 30% of that. Then they hit you with a 10% penalty. So you're going to lose 40% of your retirement when you pull it out too early. So keep in mind, if I make these investments in these retirement accounts, it's there for 59 and a half, which means you guys probably don't want to be doing that right now, right? I mean, if you got $3,000, $4,000 that you saved and made, you still got college ahead of you. You might have to be buying a ring for your lady, right? I mean, there's all kinds of different ways. You might have to need a car for college, or if you don't have a car now and you're sharing it with your sister or whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of things. You may need that money now. I'm talking about when you get a substantial income, a real job, right? Don't go looking for a fancy place and a fancy car, and don't go shopping at Shea's for your suits. I mean, unless you're just printing money. I mean, I got a friend who, student, old friend, I guess, but former student of mine, who I may have told you about him, but he went to Rice, studied under this eminent computer scholar. He was a genius here. He basically ran our school computer systems at age 15, 16, 17. He was absolutely genius. And Microsoft and Google got in a bidding war over it. And he ended up, this was 18 years ago, and he settled with, I think it was 135 plus an apartment in the San Francisco area. It was like, it'd be like making over $250,000 a year today in year one as a 22-year-old. So he made tons of money. I guarantee you that guy was wise. I mean, his dad was a Jewish businessman, and that guy, they talked about money. He actually did a brilliant thing. He bought his son like 4 different shares of an individual stocks, which is nothing, right? And then he gave it to him, but it was enough to make his son really interested in the market. He was always checking, did my $48 stock go up? Did my $37? So he was constantly talking about stocks, and he would talk with me about those, but it got him involved in the market. It was actually a brilliant move on his part. I did the same thing with my kids. Got different stocks and different funds, so they would look at them, although they really didn't look at them. But anyway, I guarantee you he had been invested early enough. He was not fancy. If you look at my school pictures, I think he's wearing the same shirt in subsequent years. And he had like a rotation of like 6 shirts that he would go through.
Brandon.
Yeah. Who?
Brandon.
We always think about how Brandon wears like the same style clothes every day. It's like the same.
But it's not bullying. He owns it. Like we had to recommend like a strange thing in English, and he wrote his about like wearing the same clothes.
Okay.
So
It's the same style and literally the same item over and over.
It's like the same item, different colors.
he has like light blue and gray and like black.
Okay.
But he likes that.
I had a kid in junior high who had 3 shirts. I don't know if you remember the Izod Lacoste. It's split into Lacoste and Izod, and the Lacoste is a little alligator. Those were like huge in the 80s. In the 80s, it's like you didn't have early 80s. If you didn't have Lacoste on, you were a loser. I mean, just a loser. My parents were like, "That's so expensive." I'm like, it's $3 more, which when I look back now, the difference between $10 and $13 is 30% more. But I remember seriously, so I would have to kick in my money to add it to theirs to get like the little alligator. And this kid, there was a knockoff brand by J.C. Penney called the Fox, and it had a little running fox on there. And this dude had a green, a red, maybe a white fox shirt. I'm not kidding. A consistent rotation. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It seems like one day he wore a different colored shirt. We were like, whoa, what has happened? But anyway, you don't have to be overly fancy. I mean, you don't. I mean, there's only a small handful of people that know the difference between a 2015 Range Rover and a 2022 Range Rover. I mean, it's people who follow Range Rovers. There's only a very small number of people who know the difference between, a $2,500 suit and an $800 suit. And some that don't know the difference between a $2,500 suit and a $250 suit. You guys may not. I mean, unless your dad, whatever, has some really nice suits and he shows you, hey, check this out and feel this fabric and look at the so-and-so and look at the lining that they have on the interior and blah, blah, blah. Most people don't know, right? So you're talking about, what am I trying to impress? Just a small little couple people, maybe? Save that money, impress them later when you've got a lot more money, which you probably will later on in life. And then remember, fund those as much as you can because there's limits on the tax-free. And after that, you'll have extra money. Fund more and do it a lot when you're younger. Yes, you'll make some sacrifices. Yes, you may live off and driving a fancy car. And you know what? If your girl you're dating needs a fancy car and you're driving a crappy car and she dumps you for it because you're not wealthy enough, thank the Lord in heaven or wherever you pray that happened because that's not who you want. I am proud to say that my wife, we was smoking I still think she's beautiful, but we're all getting older, right? But was smoking. I drove the crappiest car you can imagine. And I knew with absolute certainty, she was not dating me for the money. Because I was a school teacher, which that's not going to end well. I mean, financially, unless you were like me and very wise in the way you manipulate your money. And then also my car, I'm not kidding. My car, when I dated her, the headliner was in my hair, okay? The internal computer was broken. So it ran terribly for like the first 10 minutes and then it would start to plane out. It had multiple leaks. Like I would get in the car after a rain, I would put up my Gore-Tex jacket and I would go and I would take a hard right and water would pour out of the sunroof onto my head and then I would flip the hood back up and keep driving. And I mean, it's just always rainy. What else was wrong with this thing? Oh, by the time I sold it, the left window did not go down. So I literally back through a drive-through and take the stuff through the door, through the window on the other side. What else? Air conditioner didn't work. And somebody had tried to steal it because it's a really easy model to steal. You just take a screwdriver and you just crack the column open. And then there's this little thing where you can see that the key just turns. When you turn the key, it just moves this lever. So they would take a screwdriver again and snap that. And then all you had to do is start it with your hand or with a lever. Like you could put a screwdriver back in there and wedge it and start your car. Well, they had ripped my column apart, but because the internal computer was broken and they didn't have the magic, press the gas, turn the key just right, bring it into life because they didn't know how to, they couldn't get it going. It was a security system. Absolutely. And literally when they broke in, I had left it unlocked and then it was broken in again, unlocked, broke the back windshield. They didn't even have to. I left it open for you. And so it'd been broken in twice. I ended up taping up the windshield. It was such a crappy car. Dated her the whole time. I actually bought a new used car, an 8-year-old car. This car was, when we were dating, it was 1996. And it was an 82 Grand Prix. It was probably the length of this room. It was a massive car from the early 80s. But anyway, I just, at the time, had to pound money away towards paying off my student debt. But if I didn't have student debt, and I made a bad choice on the degree and had to get another degree, I didn't have to, but I chose to. But had I got out with that student debt, all that money that I paid off, that $900 a month, oh my gosh, if that had been in my account as well, 30, 40 years later, that stuff would have been just blown up. Hopefully you won't be in debt. Hey. He is not here. He must be in AP testing or something.
today. Oh, no, it's not science fiction. Good. I think so they're gonna get this wrong. There's AP.
Yeah, you might be just saying.
Yeah, it's good.
Gotcha.
Comp.
All right, see you, man.
Yeah, I think even that, moving their benefit.
Yes, it looked it up and checked out.
Wait, so how are you, like, why is it not minus, like, what is
Yeah,
the
you missed it,
pre-tax,
so-
the pre-tax investing?
So pre-tax means I can invest in certain things, like a traditional IRA, 401k, 403b, before I pay taxes, which reduces the amount of money I'm actually going to have taxed. So I end up paying less taxes. So I avoid that. Now I can't do that with an infinite amount of money.
I see what you're saying.
This one, Roth fund, is a post-investment tax. So you go ahead and pay, so you go ahead and pay your taxes. Notice I'm paying more because I have more taxable income, right? I didn't get rid of part of it and put that in pre-tax. So post-tax, I pay more in taxes, right? And if you look at the difference of that, I really have less left over to invest. Like say I need this much to live on both lifestyles. I've got less left over to invest. So I actually am going to invest less. That's why this guy invested 5,500. This guy invested 4,290. He invested less, and that's why this guy has less money at the end. Now, it doesn't mean this guy can't still invest 5,500 tax-free. He can, but he might not be able to. So the argument is, well, why wouldn't I want more? Well, remember, I've never paid taxes on this money, so now I have to. So let's just ask yourself, what do you plan on being when you retire? Do you plan on being really wealthy? If you're really wealthy and you still have income streams, you're in a high tax bracket, aren't you? And if you're a high tax bracket, you're paying taxes now on all your investments.
So how do you drop the tax bracket?
You don't make less money. It's not bad to be in a tax bracket
Well,
because
if
you're
you're
making
not-
more money. But look, right here, I already paid my taxes. I never have to pay taxes again. So this is tax-free money. So you have to kind of look at the situation and go, okay, if I'm going to be in a 30% tax bracket, 30% of this is what? $750,000. If I subtract $755,000, I'm down to what, 17.5? I've got less than this guy. So if I find myself in a 30% tax bracket when I retire, this was bad choice. I should have paid my taxes up front, right? And then it would have been tax-free money. Or done a hybrid, do a little bit of both so that you can pull out some at some tax rate and keep your tax rate maybe at a lower tax bracket and then the rest tax-free. Talk with a financial advisor. That's not me. I mean, I can give you some advice that my advice is do something. Because if you don't do anything, you'll see in the problems we start doing tomorrow. It's just, or especially if you don't do something in those first years. You don't get your money into something. Like my friend, Chris Rebels, he got it in real estate. He wasn't putting as much money in the market, but he saw his future. He was an architect. I mean, he saw, I'm going to be in real estate. And he was very driven. He goes, I know I'm talented. I was told that by all my professors. I know I'm going to be successful. I know I work. He's an incessant worker, like probably goes 80, 100 hours a week. He really needs to slow down. And he's always trying to do some new idea. I mean, he's 53 years old and he's probably pushing 100 million. I mean, by the time he's 70, he's going to be a really wealthy man here. He's already very well known, offices in LA, in New York City, I mean, all over the place. And around here, Rosemary Beach, I mean, he is making,
Wrestlers, man.
that dude is very, you never would have known it too, because he was this really good looking dude, you know. And I remember meeting him at a Young Life camp. I remember when I was, our ski trip back when I was a senior. And I remember thinking, and I remember my girlfriend saying, like, he's so good looking. I'm like, what? And I look like him, I'm like, he really was. He has these like stunning eyes. I mean, he's bald now, but he's like a good looking bald dude. You know, you can, like, I don't know that I would be a good looking bald dude. Like, I got a funny shaped head. Everything about this guy, he's just like, he's jacked. He still is shredded. I went to the beach with him and a couple other guys probably 5-6 years ago, maybe. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm in decent shape for a 54-year-old guy. This dude's 53, and I'm not kidding. Like, I think at one point he was benching 375 at 175 pounds. Like, ridiculously strong.
That's nuts.
But he probably weighs 165 now. He's very thin. But I guarantee he could pick me up, put me over. I mean, effortless. Just strongest pound for pound guy I probably ever run into. Well, I take that back. A kid named Blake McGarrett once was benching 280 and he wrestled 140. So he was benching double his
I mean,
weight.
if you're getting close to, I'd say like you have to.
Actually, it's stronger. He was benching more than twice his weight, but
Yeah, you got to
Blake
be
was-
pretty serious to get to 315. If
370
you're-
something.
If you're under 180 pounds and you hit 315, like you're nuts. And he's rapping 370.
I don't know if he was repping it, but I know he
He
hit that
didn't even hit it.
because he tried to walk on at Auburn's football team and then tweaked his knee and bailed. But he tried walking on like his sophomore year or whatever. And so he added about 15 pounds of muscle and but he was benching in the high 370s. Nuts. But anyway, do that. It's a lie. Waiting's a lie. You're not going to enjoy the money you don't spend like you think you might. You're just not. Or you might build one small memory and you're like, okay, that memory just cost me 2.5 million. It doesn't make any sense not to. And I know, listen, there's always that argument of Mr. Hurry, like I've hurt people's feelings in the past because they're like, well, you don't understand my financial situation. My mom works 2 jobs. I work part-time, but I get that. There's always situations. And that may be the case. Like I'm thinking of one person in particular that that they were immigrants here. The mom didn't have an education. She did. She worked 2 8-hour jobs a day. She was rarely with him and they just got by. Funding that IRA was probably not the top of they were just trying to feed themselves. And so yeah, there's always those situations. And that may be you, but I doubt it. I mean, you guys are the best mathematicians in this school. This school is one of the best schools in this country. You have the brains. If you have the work ethic to go with those brains, you're going to do well for yourselves and you will be in a position to do this. You just will. If I'm a school teacher and I can do it, you can do it. All right. And if you don't, that's your choice. But if you do, when you retire, you're like, actually in pretty good shape. Really didn't require as much sacrifice as I thought. I wanted you to see a tax schedule. This is a single schedule from 2019. I normally update it every year. Forgot last year, forgot this year. But I will say this, I did pull up this year's at the end of the day yesterday, and it's very close to these numbers. Like they might have gone up by 1,000 in each column. But what I wanted you to see, did we talk about this yesterday? We did?
No.
The deduction of the.
Well, I just wanted to show that it's not, when somebody says they're in the 37% tax bracket, it doesn't mean they pay 30% on everything. These are increments. So like if I made, and by the way, these numbers, like if you make between 97 and 39,000, that's after tax money. In the federal tax bracket, you get $12,000 free. You all do. So if you hear people saying kids don't pay taxes, not true. Kids pay taxes just like adults do, except kids don't make as much money as adults typically. And that's why you're not paying taxes because you haven't made 12 grand yet. We did the math on James and Luke. And if they work 20 hours a week at $16.50 an hour and they're making $320 a week, and that's if they're only working 20 hours. If they do that and after 52 weeks, they're very likely to make 15, 16 grand. And if they make 15 and 16 grand in a year, they'll be paying taxes on the amount over that 12. So they'll be paying 10% of the amount over that 12,000, right? All right. So this is taxable income. So it's not the amount over 0, it's the amount over 0 taxable. So that's really like the amount over 12,000. Okay. So to this. So each of these increments work out. So I gave you an example of a guy that makes 150. So if you made 150 in this state single, or he may be married but filing single. Okay, so filing single means they're ignoring anything that your spouse brought into the deal. If you make 150, of course you're not going to pay taxes on the first 12. So you have $138 in federal taxable income. So you go to 130 and you look up at that chart. The first 9,700 is taxed at that, so that's 970. The next 29, which is the next increment, is taxed at 12. That's 3573. The next increment is a window of 44,725. That's taxed at 22. And then the final 53,000 in that 138 is taxed at 24. That total federal tax is 27,294 of the 150. So when you do the math on that, you're like, what? Roughly 1/6, 15, 16% is what you paid, even though I ended up being in the 24% tax bracket. Okay, that's just federal though. State, you're paying taxes on everything over 3,000. I was thinking it was 2, but it's 3. So that gives you 147,000 taxed at 5%, which is half of 14,777, 350. Right? California at that rate, you'd be paying 10,954. And at higher rates, like basketball players that play for like Golden State, whatever, their tax bracket goes all the way up to 13% of their income once you earn more than $1 million. And that's just state tax. That's not counting like local tax, like LA City tax, maybe Newport County or Newport subdivision, whatever tax. Different areas, Malibu, whatever, charge additional taxes on top of that to keep it pretty. Add in your Social Security tax, which runs 765 if you work for somebody else. If you're self-employed, it's 15.3. So add an additional 8.2, and you're talking about total taxes of 42,000, and if you're self-employed, 51. So let's just say my wife, self-employed, makes 150. She's paying 1/3 of her taxes, 1/3 of her money in taxes. So 1/3, every dollar she gets 67 cents. Now that might be fair. It might be, but the point is, and the higher you go up, the higher it goes. If you're making $1 million, which I didn't do that because that's not a whole ton of people that are making $1 million, but if you did, remember you're paying 37% of the amount over 500, plus the state, plus the Social Security. You could be in a 50-something% tax bracket for that money. A lot of people in New York, Hawaii, places that are really high tax areas, California, sometimes pay over 60-something% of their tax. So think about this, and I'm going to get on a soapbox, and if you don't believe in my economic theories, that's totally fine, but it's just my opinion. But if you all went out to dinner, all right, and let's just say Sam has a ton of cash, right? And you're like, hey, Sam, my man, help a brother out. Why don't you buy dinner for us? Sam might go and go, why not pay for dinner? And you start going every week. Pretty soon, Sam's like, dude, I mean, I like eating here and I like you guys. It's costing me $50 for my meal, but I'm really paying $300 every time we go. It's just not worth $300 for me. What's Sam going to do? I'm out. If the next highest guy up, say you're like, well, I do a little bit better than you guys, I'll pick up the tab. At some point, he's like, it's really not 250 or 250. If you get rid of the really wealthy earners because you're taxing them so much that they just get tired of paying, like, think about it, they're working. They're hiring people. They're managing systems. They're doing all this stuff. The guys that are really wealthy, you might think they sit around and do nothing, but they are normally the guys that are working 100 hours a week. I mean, if you're making, my brother wakes up, walks around because he's had an open heart surgery. He walks around and gets his exercise, drinks his whatever he does, and he is sitting in front of a computer for 2 hours before the market opens, sometimes 3, right? And he is analyzing situations and looking at stuff, doing business, making calls. The market opens. I don't know exactly what he does now because he's got a different kind of way of handling things than back in the day. But he would have a computer setup. He'd have 8 or 10 computer screens lined up, like stacked up like this. And he's got a headset and he's just doing business and talking and making phone calls, hold, blah, blah, blah. He does it incessantly. Gets to the end of the day. He doesn't stop until like 7 p.m. And he's like, and he's gone for 13, 14 hours straight. He comes down and like, hey, what's up? I'm doing blah, blah, blah. Which is part of the reason it's no fun visiting him because he's never around until the end of the day when everybody's tired because he's been taking care of his kids and doing other stuff. But guys like that, if you all of a sudden they're like, why am I killing myself? Why am I working so hard to only take 33 cents home on the dollar? Now, sometimes they just like the challenge, but sometimes they go, man, Mexico's offering a better deal. I think I'll move to the edge of Mexico, have my business there. Ireland's offering a better deal. I can move to some other country and I get cheaper labor. Why am I here in the United States? I can still ship market stuff in, maybe pay a small tariff, blah, 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 whatever. I can do better off other places. High taxation, whether you realize it or not, the whole idea of tax the rich more, it makes them leave. Different states that have instituted different policies are seeing that. I don't see it because I'm just a normal dude. But my brother has told me many times, dude, I can't even tell you how many guys that I know, and he knows like billion-dollar people, have left California, leave California to move to Nevada because there's no sales tax. There's no state tax. Or people that will move their stuff to Florida. Now there's heavy property tax, there's no state tax. Or Tennessee. They'll leave states that have situations there that don't benefit the rich. And my mentality on that is, I know that it seems terrible that the rich as a whole probably aren't as giving. Like you look at the really people that give a lot are the people that are given like 10%, 20% income are normally not the crazy wealthy. Some of them are, but they're giving out of their need, not out of their excess. I mean, if you do studies on that, you'll really see that poorer people give more as a percentage of their wealth than richer people do, which is ironic because they have less disposable income. They need it more. They have less free money that's extra money. And it's a shame, but I will say that's the crazy weird thing about capitalism is when you go to those people that are actually hiring people and you say, I'm taxing you more. First of all, if you own shop, and I all of a sudden say, you gotta pay your employees $20 an hour. And you're like, I don't want to pay them 20 an hour. They're not even doing work for 20 an hour. And they go, too bad, laws passed, 20 an hour. What are you gonna do? Are you just gonna eat it? What ends up happening?
Fire employees that.
You either fire employees because you can't afford those, and now your people are working harder, and now somebody doesn't have a job. Or what?
Up prices.
You just up your prices. Your business people aren't gonna eat it. They're just gonna pass it on. You get rid of, like, and I'm irritated about this pipeline, and I want it to be a green world and us to lower emissions and all that kind of stuff too. But you kill a pipeline, price of gas jumps. What happens?
That's
The
what you
Keystone
say.
Pipeline wasn't even operational.
I know, but you killed it. And immediately what happens? Well, immediately, what did you see?
The prices.
Prices of gas skyrocketing. They're skyrocketing. And but what happens with that? Think about the trickle down. Gas is going up.
Yeah.
But who uses gas? Truckers. Truckers that transport spinach, that bring goods. I mean, everything starts going up. Everything just goes up. It just blows it up. A lot of those things you got to think about the economic stuff. Yeah, make a plan for 25 years. Make a plan for 50. Hope that other countries will do the same. China's not, sadly. They're going to do their thing, whatever they want to do, and lie about it. Russia's going to do their thing and lie about it. But think about those when you start voting, I think, but look at those implications, because the taxes, rich people, I gave an analogy of what would you like in Shelby County. I live in Shelby County. We have decent restaurants. They're decent at best. What do you have in Birmingham? Phenomenal restaurant. I mean, we have top 10 food in the country in Birmingham. We have some of the best chefs. We have multiple award-winning chefs.
That's very bad.
I mean, amazing. Why? Why do we have such great food? Because rich people like great food. It just makes things better. You go to Shelby County, got a bunch of blue collar folks. I mean, there's a lot of money out in Shelby County too, especially North Shelby. But you get further and further away, a nice restaurant is Biff's Steakhouse, Applebee's. You go to local little places. I mean, like, it's like, ugh, really? What is there to eat here? I go to Hardee's or Chick-fil-A just for, but again, wealth breeds better stuff. And you might look at that like, it's a shame. I can't even afford to go to Auburn football games. For me to pick I don't have a family of 5 to worry about, but like for me, my wife and I to go and get nice tickets, sit on the 30 at an Auburn game, I'm out $300. And I'm like, $300, I can watch it at home on my 70 and enjoy it and drink a Coke for 40 cents as opposed to paying $8 for it. I mean, and I'm not scrunched together and I'm not sweating and I'm comfortable or whatever. It does, but again, that kind of economy allowed me to have a 70. It allowed that those packed stadiums, they didn't have to block the channel and they got to release it on air, and I got to enjoy the fruits of that. So sometimes even being a secondhand citizen in a capitalistic society is better than being a first-hand citizen in a very regulated, restricted economy, because heck, I'll give you another example. A girl I taught named Eleanor married a professional baseball player who got drafted by the Blue Jays. Is it Canada? Is it Toronto Blue Jays? So they live in Canada. They got pregnant. In Canada, it's socialized healthcare. At least it was at the time. I'm sure it still is. Socialized healthcare. In their healthcare, they could not see a baby doctor until 6 months. She's like, what? Like my wife, when we had kids, you saw them at 2 months, you saw them at 3 months, you had all kinds of visits. Insurance didn't cover it. So she would fly here, because he was a baseball player, made good money, fly here, and they would just pay cash for doctor visits to do checkups. And you're like, okay, but the upside is poor people have healthcare, efficient healthcare, whatever. But the downside is the capitalism that we have here gives you opportunity, maybe not every opportunity, especially like sometimes you got to sacrifice a generation. You know, sometimes literally somebody's got to take one for the team, sacrifice a generation to make it better for your kids. I mean, what do they say? Hard times
Make good people.
make good people, good people
Make easy or bad times.
make good times, and good times make soft people, or whatever. You know, but sometimes it takes a generation to get your family to a position. My dad did it. My grandfather came over here on the boat from Scotland, worked really hard, never made any money. My dad was in the military, was a school teacher, later on, taught flight school, whatever, and made it a little bit better for me. For me, I got to go to college, didn't have to pay for all of it, pay for half of it. My kids, they got to pay for all of it. Now they might all be soft and their kids might be spoiled and drug addicts and whatever, who knows what. But Again, opportunity, sometimes it takes a couple generations, but with all of its sinfulness, nothing's perfect. I got to vote for, man, let the rich, let him pay his third, let him pay his whatever, but increasing more taxes is going to discourage that desire.
I mean, Canada has like higher, I mean, their system has like lower infant mortality, lower like maternal mortality. I mean, I feel like bringing opportunity to people, first you have to be like.
It's comparing apples and oranges, I think.
What do you mean?
Is it
Canada didn't have 100 years of the same kind of persecution to a social class that we did, or 200 years. It's just different. It's like comparing us to Sweden or Norway or these. They didn't come out of slavery 200 years ago and then not come out of slavery. I mean, 100 years ago. I mean, that's something that the sins of our past are continuing to haunt us. So it's apples and oranges when you compare those systems, because we have results of our actions that were very recent. I mean, I remember very clearly unbelievable racism in my lifetime when I was 8 and 9. It was happening in Montgomery, where certain races had to be inside by 5 o'clock. When I was 8 and 9, I mean, I remember this, and I'm like, wait a minute, why do you have to leave? My friend Roland Ray's like, no, I gotta get home. Why do you gotta get home? Well, it's 5 o'clock curfew. I'm like, what are you talking about? In my lifetime, it's insanity. I mean, how is that even possible for freedom? I mean, so a lot of the sins of that, people like to say, oh, it's the same situation. It's not the same
Why
situation.
not try like investing like in like those like disadvantaged communities to rebuild? Like you look at like Europe was destroyed like after World War II, and like they rebuilt. They had, I mean, probably the number of people who were like.
Yeah, and I haven't studied any of that, and I really haven't, honestly. And if I had, it's probably long gone from my brain. But I will say this. The uniqueness, there's a reason why people are pounding at our borders to get in here. There's a reason why people are fleeing socialist countries to get in here. I mean, there's a reason. And there might be some other places. I just don't see people pounding at the gates of other countries. There's something about this, with all of its sins, there's something about it, but it's opportunity. It's not the guarantee of happiness, but it's the right to pursue it. And that is what it's something beautiful. Sad thing is, wealthy people, in a perfect world, they give back. In a perfect world, they continue to give back. Is pointing a gun at them and forcing them to pay, is that the right thing? That's what the government's doing, essentially, right? You pay or you're going to jail. And they, so to me, it's bother. Our rich people paying, my brother pays a butt ton of taxes. I mean, he makes a ton of money, a ton. Elon Musk paid what, 12 billion? Highest single tax payment in the history of the US. Am I crying for Elon Musk? Absolutely not. Because if he paid 12, he probably made 24. I mean, good for him. He made an extra 12 billion he can spend. And he doesn't seem to mind. But at some point, there has been a tax rate in this country that was something like 78 or 80%.
Top market tax rate was like 91%.
Yeah, it's like that's not going to encourage people. Like if I'm making a ton of money and somebody says I'm paying 90%, I'm like, what's my motivation?
I mean, that was back in the post-war. I mean, that was like the biggest
Yeah,
blow
yeah.
our economy has ever seen. Like
In the short term, in the long term, what happens?
eventually there was like stagflation.
Yeah,
In the 70s.
and terrible. And eventually people just go, I'm out, dude. What is my motivation for risking all of this? I'm the risk taker. I'm the entrepreneur. I'm the risk taker. I make all this risk. I'm paying 9%. Dude, it's time to go to the beach. Right? And if I do that, if you do that, everybody gets unemployed. And you just keep seeing it. You see it. And yes, it might bring in new markets for a while, but in the long run, it's a short-term fix. It's a long-run disaster. And again, that's why you make it make it fair, but I don't know. Ultimately, I think the government is the worst at handling finances and managing anything. There's corruption. Everybody's so many evil people everywhere, selfish people everywhere. And here's the thing. They run something, they screw it up. If you have a private company and you screw it up, what happens? You're out of business, or somebody who does it better takes your place. The government screws up, what do? You just take more of your money. It's like there's no consequence. The post office, when's the last time the post office ran in the black? Never. It's like tens of billions of dollars a year. I'm making that number up, but there's billions of dollars a year they're in the deficit. Why do we even have a post office? Why don't we go UPS, FedEx, whatever, take over, create something where there's economies of demand or a competition, create something, because that's what fixes that stuff. And it just drives prices down. If you're the only guy who's got something in town, charge whatever you want. he starts building a better mousetrap. Now you got competition. What are you going to do?
Wait, what do you mean by the postal service thing? Because isn't UPS like everything's private except for USPS, right?
The USPS government owned.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
everything else is private though.
Right. They lose money every year. UPS makes money. They make tons of money. FedEx makes tons of money. The post office costs taxes. They literally run to a deficit.
So you're saying like they
If
should
they-
tank on
If they take the post office,
USPS.
which I would argue that it's less necessary than ever. Because how many people really send mail out? I mean, you don't really have to. You can email, you can do so many different things. And if you did want to send mail out, send mail out. I get most of the mail I get goes straight into the garbage. It's like, why? It's just filling up my garbage can. It's annoying to me. All right. Very rarely does a bill or something come that can't come otherwise. It's usually a letter from the government, but it's billions of dollars of taxpayer money that just gets funneled. But all they have to do is go, done. FedEx take over, open bidding market. Somebody step in and take place. Yeah, cost of mail might double. So what? It's already there. Somebody else is paying for it. When you mail something, I'm paying for your mail. You're paying for his mail. We're already paying for it in taxpayer dollars.
I mean, but then you look at like how
This
that-
school system is an illusion. This federally run school system, state whatever, is an illusion of how the government operates. It's a result of it's so great here comparatively that people like me are willing to work here and enjoy it and have fun here, and people aren't threatening my life. I mean, I had a PE teacher with stuff in a garbage can once because he torqued off some junior high kids. They stuffed them in a garbage can. Like, I'm not worried about that here.
We better watch it back now.
But anyway, my point is people come from all over the place to teach here because they know it's a great place to teach. And because of that, we have this illusion of this, this government run entity. No, go around the state of Alabama and look at what's happening. This is one of a handful of schools that has really got it great. And it's a result of your community getting taxed at 10% and then funneling it in here so they can pay their teachers more. They can buy them new projectors. If I go, hey, can I have an extra computer? Why not? Have two. And if that's not enough, take a Chromebook. You know, need some other stuff? What can we do for you? I mean, it's like over and over and over. It's not the real government is how can I get mine? And it's corrupt people doing corrupt things. I don't care who you have in office. It's like power hungry people. And yes, it's a necessary evil. It is. The government needs to be there for certain situations, but smaller government, good, more taxes, bad, more efficiency, more accountability. That's good. And again, that's my opinion. There's brilliant people that would argue for me, brilliant people that argue against.
Like Alabama has like some of the lowest tax rates. We have like some of the crappiest schools, crappiest roads. Like Homewood is good because
But you know why? You know what? Our tax rate is constant
right.
across the board. We pay some poverty-stricken guy making 12 grand a year, 5% of 70%, 5% of his salary. The same guy who's making 2 million, 5%. That's not right. Change that tax scale. You can still give them a break and tax the other guys a little bit more. You have to do California to them, but you could have a scale that goes from 1 to 8.
And it's mostly sales tax, which is
Sales tax is so brutal. That's a huge tax on the poor, right? Anyway, whatever. Good conversation. Hey, tomorrow make sure you have a calculator or whatever. We're going to get into actually crunching some of these numbers. See you guys. Y'all good one.
I need some help deciding whether to do an AB or BC calculus.
Here's my thought. You are phenomenal when it comes to, from what I've seen, when it comes to, I see this, I can learn how to do it. I can be fine on it. Like you saw it on the last test. When it comes to rules, knowing those rules, applying those rules, you are money. The one weird, and there are many aspects of calculus that are like that, and you're going to thrive on those because you're going to know. The downside is there are tons of things that are very vague. And the more vague it becomes, that's the only thing I might worry. Because like some of the times we've had a test where things are vague, you're like low B's. The tests that are like derivatives, that are very exacting, you have high A's. And BC Cal goes so fast because there's so much material you have to cover, whereas AB Cal covers less material in the same amount of time. So think about it like on those times where you might have struggled the most, like where you made low B's, or I don't know, have you ever made a C in here, the test? Maybe once or something.
Go.
Most of the time you're pretty good.
You get A's and B's in here.
Right. So the times the material you got A's on, great. But the material you had B's on, probably would have been nice to have an extra day, or maybe an extra 2 days, or maybe an extra 3 days to go over stuff. That's what AB calculus allows. AB calculus, I had a diagram. I can show you this. Look right here if I still have it. Okay. So I have this picture here I put up on the board once. Hope it shows up. Okay. So think about this right here is Cal 1. Okay. So I do Cal 1 right here I finish it pretty much like if you were taking college, it would be like 1 semester of Cal 1. Okay. Cal 2 is like an extra semester, right? AP Calculus covers most of Cal 1 and part of Cal 2. And I can fit it in there pretty nicely and give you a really great review. BC Cal covers all of Cal 1 and all of Cal 2, not just a little part of it, all of it. And it shoves it in there in less time. So literally BC Cal is like taking an entire year of college calculus, which is great because you get a year of it, but it packs it in to less than a year. And you get a smaller review than I give my kids. I get a longer review. So it's more material and then smaller review time. So it just goes so fast. And on those times where it's like derivatives that you just know backwards and forwards, you're going to be fine. But things like limits, it's going to be trickier. It would have been nice to have maybe an extra day of practice. Or if it comes to really hard stuff like related rates or things where you really have to be thinking and it's all kinds of word problems and that kind of stuff, I really think you would benefit from having an extra day to think about it, an extra day to do practice problems to get comfortable, an extra day to see that stuff. Helmers doesn't do that. He's got to get 2 semesters in this much time. I have to get 1 semester and a little bit in this much time. So I get so many extra review days. So I literally, some of my kids that are in this class that would take AB, now Helmers will teach both classes next year. I think that's the way they're going to do it. So you would have him either way, but on one, he would just be a lot slower about things, take a lot of extra days to cover stuff, do a lot of extra review problems. I think you'd probably like that. I think you'd probably benefit of it. You might be fine in BC, but I will say this, it'll be much harder to get an A in BC. I think you could get an A in AB, and if you can't get an A in AB, then it would be really hard in BC. You'd be getting like a C in BC. It's just so much extra material. It's like Sam. Sam's a smart guy. You make better grades than Sam probably overall. Sam, if he took BC, he would be okay. He'd probably make a C in there. He might eke out a low B, but in AB, he might eke out a low A, but if he took AB calculus, I really think he'd have an A comfortable A. He wouldn't be sweating it very much. You taking a bunch of other AP classes too, harder classes?
AP Bio and AP Gov and Econ.
So you've got kind of 3 because one, do they go every other day in the AP? Yeah. So that's 4 tough classes plus maybe some other easier classes, or maybe not so easy like AP English. Regular English is not easy. I think Miss who teaches that? You remember? Anyway, but I really think AB would give you a little bit more breathing room. You wouldn't be so what on earth? Like there was 1 or 2 tests this year that I kind of felt like your head was spinning a little bit. Like you just needed a couple extra days of problems to kind of go, oh, okay. And I think if you'd have had those couple extra days, you'd have been fine. I really do. But not having them, it was like, it just became a little bit, ugh. So ultimately it's your call. But if I were the only people that I recommend to take BC typically are people that have made A's on pretty much everything. Like if they haven't made any C's, they haven't made B's, like they have 95, 93 averages. you've had some good averages and you work hard. I know that. Even though you may get a little occasionally tired now and then, but I think AB would probably fit you better. But if you're like bent on taking BC, you can. It's just, it's so much more shoved into less time. You know, it just makes it hard. Like it's harder than college. In college, you go from August to May. Helmers does August to April, and then does a review. So he's actually covering 2 semesters of calculus in less time than a college professor would cover, which makes it hard because it's already hard enough in college. So that's what I would do. But I know you love math, and I know you want to be in the highest class. AB calculus is still AP calculus. I mean, it's still a hard course. They didn't even have BC here until about 15 years ago. So I think AB is super challenging.
Yeah, I want to go into engineering kind of thing.
Well, and that's another thing. Some people take BC because they're going into engineering and they just want to knock this calculus out. But I would argue if you went into engineering and you didn't know calculus like the back of your hand, you know what I mean? Like you didn't know it really well, that it was going to hurt you more later on. Whereas if you took AB and you really knew AB really well, like you really got it, I think it'd be like getting a foundation of your language. It makes it easier to progress in that language as opposed to not knowing it that well. And then they send you off to another country and you don't really get those basics well. I think this would probably be a better fit, but you got to make your decision because we have an open enrollment here. So you get to decide as a student, talk to your mom and see, but like just looking through, I know this last test was awesome. Super proud of you for making that 103. But just looking back at some of the other stuff, like the first derivatives test, you definitely were better, but that was 84, but you showed you knew it at the end. Having that little extra time to look at it, that was what I'm talking about. You had a little extra time and you went from a low B to over 100. The limits test, those were Bs. The stats test, that was your one bad one right there. But like on the 9 weeks exam, second time through, you saw that stuff, you studied the second time, had a little bit more time to look at it, 94. That little bit, whenever I look at these, like test on probability, you made it 83. I bet if you had a little bit more time to look at it, probably would have done better. And that's what the AB class gives you. It just gives you, for every 1 day Helmers has for review, we take 2, And sometimes he doesn't even do a review. He moves fast, man. He moves fast. And so that would be, I guess, the one thing I would say is that from what I've seen of you on the times that you've struggled, I've always felt like, man, if he just had this much more time, or if we had taken a couple extra days, which we don't have, but if we had taken a couple extra days, I bet he would have done better. And AB lets you do that. It just works in this couple days. And if you ask all my kids that are in AB that had me, they're like, yeah, it just feels better. You always have that extra day to process. You do an extra day of examples to go, oh, that's what I'm doing wrong. And that's where I think it would help. But ultimately, you got to make the choice.
Yeah.
All right. All right. You the man.